What's up, War Report family? We are back with another great edition of the Auburn Express, powered by the War Report. Joining me is one of my favorite guests to talk a little bit about what's going on down on the plains, Josh Pate. Josh, before we get started, you got to do. I don't even know how to introduce you these days, man. Help me introduce Josh Pate. You got a new thing going on there with CBS.
Oh, we just renamed the show Josh Pate's College Football Show. So I took ownership of the asset. So the legal on the piece of paper said it reverts to Josh Pate's College Football Show. Now they put that as a filler, not knowing what I was going to rename the show. So I just said, why don't we just call the show this? It sounds great. It works for searchability. And so we just stuck with it. So that's what it is now.
Well, the name Josh Pate certainly commands a lot of respect in the college football community. That's why I have you on. Let's jump right in here, Josh. Hugh Freeze and the Auburn Tigers lost to Cal on Saturday. And moving forward, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. Now, Josh, after that game, it was the shortest post conference I've ever been a part of.
5 or 6 minutes, right?
5 minutes and 8 seconds. And so on Monday, there were a lot more questions. It was a little bit longer, but everybody wants to know about quarterback. Now, I know you keep up with it, but Payton Thorne, man, you decided not to go after a QB in the portal this offseason. You know, can Hugh Freeze fix Payton Thorne for the rest of the season, or is it time to cut bait? We've seen better coaches bench their QBs. Milroe got benched last year. You know, hell, Tua got benched in the middle of a national. Hurts got benched in the middle of a national title game. You know, why can't Hugh Freeze bench Payton Thorne?
Well, I would say he can't bench him because there is no Tua Tagovailoa sitting behind Payton Thorne.
Sure.
I would say also, no, he will not fix him during the season. So I'm answering all your questions at once. No, you don't fix quarterbacks during the season. That's message board talk, and it's hope. We can hope it, but you've got what you got there. I would also say, who was I listening to? I was listening to Kublik the other day. They were taking some calls, and they were asking, hey, why don't we – a caller said, how can we know the backups aren't good enough if we don't give them a chance? And, you know, Kublik said the same thing I would say. They've been given a chance in practice. They haven't shown enough to take the job. Now, we do know, Mike, on the other hand, there have been dozens of times throughout college football history where begrudgingly a coach puts the backup in and the backup ends up taking off, which just shows you how inexact the science of quarterback play is, even for guys. Yeah, even guys who know what they're looking at. So it's not like I'm telling you if they made a move, it wouldn't improve. And I'm not even telling you it's hard to improve because it's hard to get worse than what they've got right now. I get all that. Before anyone gets in the comments, I understand what the situation here is. Trust me, I put myself through watching the replay of the Cal game. Y'all watched it live. I knew what was coming, and I still watched it. So hats off to me. Salute me. I think what he's looking at, two different conversations here. What he's looking at is he hasn't seen anything he trusts more in practice. And then with the lack of going to the portal for a quarterback, now I differ, I think, with most Auburn fans on that. I told you this in the preseason. I told you I didn't think they were going to be that good this year, but I also agreed with him not going and getting a quarterback. Now, let me let you in on a little something. Okay. You may know this. I'm not sure that most people know this. They made efforts in the portal. It's not like they threw their hands up and said, we're not going to go anywhere.
They looked at options, Josh, right? They looked at options.
And some of those options people don't know about. Some of those options, let me just say they weren't on the portal radar. So I'll leave it at that because we all understand what the situation is in college football these days. They weren't going to get the ones they were willing to spend on. And so they chose to stand pat. Now, I told you I thought that was a good idea because I didn't think this year's Auburn team was going to be capable of 9 or 10 wins, even with a different quarterback. That's just what I thought. So if you go get the quarterback, it falsely inflates the hype bubble, and then it gets popped and you look like a failure. Whereas if your expectations are low, you lose to Cal, it sucks, but people don't completely blow the thing up. I think this roster looks so radically different this time next year. Now, here's the trade-off. I believe by year 3, you should have your roster built through high school recruiting. So if we're talking about next year's hope hinging on being a really, really big acquisition team in the portal, I know what Florida State did last year. I get all that. I also know what Florida State's doing this year. I get that too. So I'm not sure that's exactly where I want the program. And they're recruiting high school very well. But I want the thing ready to go by year 3. And I still question whether it'll be fully ready to go. Like if I take a quarterback from the portal and I put that key in the ignition, what's the rest of the Auburn car in year 3? And by the way, how wild is it? We are, you and I are talking in the middle of September.
Yeah.
And we're talking like we're talking in June. We're talking about the next year.
Yeah. Josh, so you said something interesting there about quarterback and it coming down to quarterback essentially because the rest of your roster will be built from high school by year 3, hopefully. What we've seen so far is that these wide receivers look SEC ready already. Now, he went away from his guys, here in game 2 versus Cal. They spread the ball around a lot more in game 1. They kind of got away from that in game 2. He talked about having a lack of rhythm as to why they didn't do that. I felt like some of those younger guys could have helped them on Saturday. But from a system standpoint for Hugh Freeze, let's say you have to pull the quarterback and you got to go to Hank Brown. And here's where I say, again, I push back a little bit on the argument about these guys not showing it in practice because he said that on Monday in our press conference. He said it's hard not to start the guy that's consistently been the best in practice. But however, you made this decision. So in some ways you signal to everybody else, this quarterback room is good enough for me next year. So why not go to the next guy? Because you put your faith in them when you decided to stick with these guys for year 2. And then, again, it's you've got game tape on one of these guys. You don't have game tape on the other ones. So it's going to be interesting to see what direction Hugh Freeze decides to go. But for projecting for the rest of the season, now you took the under this year, if I remember correctly when we talked a couple months ago. Yeah, and we're trending that way. Auburn still has time to recover, but that Oklahoma game looks different now than it did, a few weeks ago. We were talking about that maybe being a marquee SEC matchup in week 5. And now the air's kind of come out of that game a little bit. What games does Auburn have left on this schedule that, you think maybe they could surprise it?
Oh, no. They can still win the Oklahoma game. I hadn't written that off at all. Mike, I know you may not have done this, and God bless you if you haven't. I've watched all the Oklahoma games this year.
Yeah, I watched them too.
More impressive. Like they don't have a big edge on Auburn. And so here's what you haven't seen yet. You haven't seen Tennessee go in there next week. They're going into Norman next week. And Tennessee is a top 5 team to me right now. So you'll see Oklahoma get themselves a big dose of what Michigan just got, a shot against a top 5 team. And if the result is emphatic, they're coming to your building right off that. So if Oklahoma has been wobbly, which they have been, Jackson Arnold has not been good so far this year, and then they get exposed somewhat, and then they come to your building, how do they look any different than you? And you got home field at that point. Now, their quarterback should be a lot better than yours, but he hasn't been all that great so far this year. So they could be wounded, desperation mode, already one conference loss. I think that profile, you're right, it has changed, but I think it could change a little bit more and maybe inadvertently sort of balance itself out. I think Auburn, that's the one, like to me, that's where their season can restart is against Oklahoma.
Yeah. Again, for our listeners, Oklahoma comes to the Plains for the first time in the history of college football. It still has a chance to be a pivotal game for the season if Auburn can pull out New Mexico this Saturday and Arkansas and go into Georgia 4-1. Potentially. Again, the hype machine got going, Josh, and everyone was like, "Oh, what if they're 5-0 headed into Georgia?" And now the air has come out of that completely. Look, is there a scenario this season where Hugh Freeze ends up on the hot seat in year 3?
There's always that scenario. No one can withstand a 3-9 or a 4-8 without huge questions being asked. I don't think that's going to happen, but yeah, there's always a scenario. I think also in the aggregate, you and I may have talked about this. I said it a lot over the summer. The hot seat was really quiet. You had Napier, you had Pittman, and that was basically it. And I thought to myself, that's like calm before the storm in this sport, because when salaries have never been higher and the ability to flip your roster quick has never been more available with the portal. And so you got examples of guys turning it around overnight. When you're getting paid a whole lot of money and the fans think you can turn it around overnight and you don't, is that not a recipe for really short patience and really quick instances of the heat being turned up? Mm-hmm. And so maybe we are talking about Hugh Freeze, maybe we're not, but there are going to be several guys across the country whose who are on hot seat meters at the end of the year who weren't even in that conversation at the beginning of the year. We just got to figure out who it is.
Yeah, it's interesting because Napier has the hardest college football schedule we've ever seen, right? And obviously, he opened with a loss versus Miami and was able to bounce back in week 2. But that bottom half of the conference, Josh, it feels like there's not a lot of separation between those teams right now. Vanderbilt surprised everybody and beat Virginia Tech. Kentucky, South Carolina took Kentucky to the woodshed.
Yep.
It seems like there's a lot of movement there. Where do you see Auburn in the conference hierarchy right now?
They're in that group of teams you just talked about, and it feels to me, Mike, like it's a group of teams where someone will figure something out and elevate themselves. It's like falling in the mud. Like someone will figure out a way to get themselves up, and then they won't slip again, and they'll walk out of the mud, and they'll still have it covered, but they'll look back and they'll say, at least I'm not in that anymore. So like all of these teams probably have that capability. Auburn's got that capability as well. You just recalibrate. Like the college football season is a year-long recalibration process where once you get a result, okay, what do I expect now? So after the Cal loss, what do I expect now? Well, if Oklahoma comes in here in 2 weeks and we win 31-28, well, what do I expect now? And so your eyes get wide when you think about the latter instead of the former. It's a lump of teams. Like Oregon is a rich man's version of this. A ton was expected from Oregon. Oregon has played the entire state of Idaho so far through 2 weeks and slipped by both of them. So they're asking this question in Eugene as well.
Oregon has underwhelmed so far this season. I agree. I've despite being at the games, Josh, and you know this from covering live. A lot of times people see more at home than we see in the stadium because they got access to all the TV, the wonderful replays. But Oregon, certainly, I've been sitting there. I have this weird grudge against Oregon where I pray on their downfall, and I don't know why. So they slipped by. Auburn was hoping to slip by. They weren't able to do that versus Cal, but there's still some opportunities left on this schedule. They've got a really hard road slate, Josh, with Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, and Alabama on the road. Alabama has underwhelmed a little bit, maybe in Caleb DeBoer's debut here. It was iffy against USF for a while in that game. So we'll see if Hugh Freeze can pull off an upset here or two. He came close in year 1. But they got to go to Tuscaloosa in year 2. Josh, before we get out of here, tell people where they can find the Josh Pate College Football Show. Did I say that right?
That's it. Hey, if you search that, it should pop up. And if you don't, I'm not worth listening to. So Josh Pate's College Football Show should work for you.
Guys, that's it for another great edition of the Auburn Express, powered by the War Report with my guy Josh Pate. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Report on every social media platform. TW Report on TikTok. Signing off, and as always, War Eagle.